It's such a tragic state of affairs that people think that they are the limitation of the body. So, what the false matrix did, it severed our connection to the soul. What we're here to do is to reconnect. That's why we undertook this mad journey. Not only do we raise frequency, we raise the frequency of the false matrix. We shift reality.
How do you go about integrating your soul so that your physical body can heal?
This is where there is so much misunderstanding.
I recently launched Love Covered Life Academy, where I offer monthly masterclasses at a deeply discounted rate. These courses include profound meditations that will guide you into a deep spiritual connection, monthly teaching videos, and daily practices that we get to do together in community. All this you'll get to experience with a growing community group of conscious, spiritually minded individuals, and monthly live Q&A sessions with me where I deep dive into your spiritual practice with you and answer your questions. Sign up here. I cannot wait to see you there. I am here today with Kerry K, and she had a childhood of severe illness that led to many near-death experiences, and we're going to learn about her experiences and the wisdom that she's brought back today. Kerry, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much, Melissa. Great to be here.
Likewise. So you have had so many experiences, even as a young child, and I was just listening to an interview of yours where you were talking about what you described as the pre-consciousness. And I'm thinking maybe that's similar to what some experiencers call like a pre-birth consciousness or a pre-birth memory. But I'd love to hear your take on that, and I would love to hear what maybe your earliest memory is of the other
Yeah.
side.
Well, let's start with pre-consciousness because when I was really young, I would have a lot of incredible illness, which I didn't realize at the time was the greatest blessing of my life and the greatest teacher of my life. And where those near death experiences led me was to many places. It wasn't just one place. And I didn't have the vocabulary at the time to know that the many places it was leading me to was to the many dimensions to experience the true multidimensional nature of who we are. So some of the time I experienced what I now know to be 4D, which is the place where our loved ones hang out when they're on the so-called other side. And I got to experience 5D and I got to experience all of the dimensions until I was in what many people would describe as the universe or God, the mind of God, the heart of God, where it's pure consciousness. You can be aware of yourself as an individual, but simultaneous to that, you're aware of yourself as the whole. There is no separation, nothing, no separation whatsoever between yourself and the whole. So your experience of yourself, your experience of life is so different. It's as if you're plugged into the heart and the mind of God, and you're breathing with the heart and the mind of God. And every wave of energy that passes through you is simultaneously passing through the heart and mind of God. So that is the space that when I talk about pre consciousness, I'm talking about before we came into any incarnations, before we individuated from the Godhead and took on the soul story that we've all become. And the soul story is inclusive of this life, of course, but of your myriad of past lives, future lives, parallel lives. That's the soul. So the soul is the part of you that individuated from God, and that pre consciousness space is without the individuation. Back, what some people would refer to as home, back home. When people say, I'm so homesick, I just want to go home, I'm longing for home, they're longing for that unification and that oneness. And when people say, I'm lonely and surely life isn't meant to feel so isolated and so separated and so apart from everything, so empty, it's because somewhere inside of us we have this longing for home, for the unification. And those were my favorite experiences of all the times when I had these out of body or near death experiences, it was when I could go there into that energetic soup of pre consciousness. That was my most favorite. And time, you don't know if you're there for a few seconds or a few years. It's all the same. It's all now. And we can understand, you see, we can hear that at the linear level, at the intellectual level. So a lot of spiritual people almost unknowingly, unconsciously regurgitate what we've been told. We say things which are true, like there is no time. Until you experience timelessness, though, our comprehension of that phrase is so lacking because to be in the infinite presence of now, as presence itself, is the ultimate thrill. It's the ultimate oneness. And when I listen to people speak, I realize how many people are longing for that place. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. I have so many questions just from that. I remember hearing you talk about how you felt panic when you separated from that higher consciousness and came into the body. Was that coming in from a pre birth, or was that maybe coming back from one of your out of body experiences?
That was a memory of actually coming into this incarnation in the first
Okay.
place.
Okay.
And what happened was my mom explained it to me like this. My mom said to me, almost flippantly one day, we're having this very casual conversation, and she says, "Oh, yeah, when you were in utero, you kept trying to come away." Those were her exact words. You kept trying to come away. So eventually we had to go to the doctor and have a Sharotka stitch, which was to actually stitch you into the womb to prevent a miscarriage. And when she said that, I went hot and cold and goosebumpy because I kept having these memories. And I couldn't place it until she described what had happened in her pregnancy with me. The memory that I would have, I'd lie in bed at night just before going to sleep, and I would remember falling down a tunnel. And I later realized that that falling down a tunnel was me coming from pre consciousness into the Kerry incarnation. And that scared the bejeebers out of me because I thought that I was done. I'd lived many, 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 many lives. I'd mastered it. And I went back home. And as a higher soul, there was an agreement, obviously, to come back into embodiment, to come back and teach, to be a representative of the God mind, pure spirituality, in other words. Because spirituality that we see on planet Earth is so misunderstood, so distorted. It's carryovers from so many people, and it's been so influenced by the false matrix that we have some hugely distorted teachings within the spiritual community. So, from a soul perspective, my agreement was okay, I'll come back into body. And the part of me that was dropping down and coming into the Kerry incarnation, in other words, into this life, didn't have privy to that information. So I thought, oh, whoops, this is a mistake. I'm going into a body, but it's okay. It's okay. I'll just miscarry. And I feel myself coming into this little baby body and swimming in the water, in the uterine water, which just felt like home. And by the way, that space feels just like higher dimensional air. So when we think of ourselves as coming into the world literally in a sack of water, we might think, God, that I used to think that's so weird. It's so weird that we come into a water world, into dry air. And after these many experiences outside of this incarnation, I now realize, wow, it's because it's not crystalline water. It's not wet. It's not the kind of water that comes out of our taps, but it's watery. So when you're in it, you feel the sense, you feel almost like the viscosity of water. So there I was in this water world, which wasn't that different from the higher dimensional worlds, just in terms of texture. But I realized I'd come into an embodiment and thought, it's okay, I'll take a quick exit out. And then feeling very claustrophobic when I realized that my escape route was blocked. And the panic. Oh, I can't get out, I can't get out. That was terrifying. And coming into embodiment, I came in with severe illness because I had so conditioned myself to miscarry. I'd so conditioned myself for those 9 months that it didn't really matter. I wasn't going to be here. I could just take a quick exit out. So the body took quite a toll and had to really learn to live and learn to be alive and learn to be in the physical world. And for the first many years of my life, I just wanted to get back out. I just wanted to, didn't really care if I committed suicide or was run over by a bus or if illness took me. I just wanted to go home. I loved my family, so it was very conflicting. I loved my mom, I loved my family, I loved my father, I loved my brother, but I just had a longing for true home. I knew this wasn't it.
Well, again, so many questions from what you just shared. Are you familiar with Christian Sundberg?
Not at all.
Okay, so he has profound pre-birth memories and then had a very similar situation where he came into a life previous to this one and actually did like completely panicked and did end up miscarrying.
Huh.
And then got back to the other side and was like, "Oh no, I had planned that whole thing and I really have to go through with it." So then he came
Exactly.
back in and same thing again, he really felt the panic again coming in, but was able to master it this time and stay in the womb.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really terrifying when you're used to the enormity of living in the oneness of pre-consciousness. I mean, you're everything. You're everyone. You are the universe. And now you're coming into what feels so infinitesimally small. It feels like you somehow have to fit this infinite thing into a pinhead. And you think, how am I going to do it? It's impossible. It's scary. It's frightening. And you feel, well, I certainly did. I felt a tremendous sense of panic and a tremendous sense of I can't breathe, almost like that mass anxiety, realizing that I was now stuck in the body. And I'm grateful that I was, but yeah, I didn't realize for the first couple of years that this was how it was meant to be. Gratefully, I could commune with my soul. Gratefully, I could commune with other higher beings much later on who helped me to understand, Kerry, you were actually, this wasn't a mistake. You were actually meant to be here. This was very much by design. And then I was like, okay, I can do this, I can be here. I don't have to take my escape plan.
I would love to hear a little bit more about that, the process of you remembering why you had chosen to come here and becoming more comfortable in the human body.
Wow, I was never comfortable in the human body, I would say, until my 40s, genuinely, sincerely, and legitimately. I just had this fight and this struggle with the human body. It felt it felt foreign, but worse than foreign. It felt so limiting. It felt so constricting. I later came to understand why, and that is because the body, the physical body, is the part of us that is tied to the false matrix. It's enslaved to the false matrix. And connected to the physical body is the soul. So now we've got a problem because now what's happening is we've got this infinite being called the soul, and the soul isn't really separate from the body, but at the same time can't get into the body. It's, in a sense, locked out. And how that happens is when we're born into the false matrix, into this false paradigm that we live in right now, we are severed energetically at the crown from our multidimensional consciousness. We can get a little whiff, we can get a little waft, we can get a little taste and a little sniff of it, but we don't have full unbridled access, which is why we have amnesia to who we are, amnesia to where we were even before this incarnation. This is a very abnormal state of affairs. Most people, most beings, even third dimensional, do not have the type of amnesia that we've got here. This is primarily because of the false matrix and because of the hijacking of the body into the false matrix, separating the soul from the body. Yet, the soul is always going to hover around the body because there's this incarnational, coordinated plan that is unfolding. It's kind of like this physical body is part of the soul. We always think this physical body has nothing to do with the soul. It's got a lot to do with the soul. And that was a big turning point for me. That changed everything when I realized, wow, the body is not a throwaway car. I actually used to think of it that way. I used to think of the body as just the vehicle. It's all it is. That was my mistake. I said, well, the body is just the vehicle. I am not the body. So it doesn't matter what happens to the body. I don't have to love it. I don't have to look after it. I don't have to feed it. I don't have to. It's just a car, you know. And if you don't like your car, just scrap it, and the infinite presence will be unaffected. The soul will be unaffected. I was incredibly wrong. That is not true. The body is very much a part of the soul because the soul has created and co-created the biology, this matrix of physicality that we call the body. So there have been many, many journeys of deep acceptance, many journeys of coming into true love and honor of the body. You know, I hear people say things to me. They say things like this. They say, Kerry, I don't think I'm going to ascend because my body's broken. I've got arthritis, I've got diabetes, I've got cancer, I've got whatever it is. And it's such a tragic state of affairs that people think that they are the limitation of the body. Because what we're actually here to do is to re embody, to re energize this body with the soul intact, with the soul coming in. So, what the false matrix did, it severed our connection to the soul. What we're here to do is to reconnect so that we have a direct line of connection back home and to bring home into the physical body. And when we do that, we heal. Not only do we heal, we raise frequency. Not only do we raise frequency, we raise the frequency of the false matrix. We shift reality, both our reality as well as our collective reality. And that's why we did this. That's why we undertook this mad journey of coming into physical form in the first place, was for the opportunity to do this, to bring soul back into the body and to basically fall in love with this again.
Oh, I love that. So I would like to ask you in your personal experience because you dealt with a lot of illness as a child. How or I'm not sure of the correct wording on this if there is like a how to or a right way to do it, but how do you go about integrating your soul so that your physical body can heal?
Yeah. This is where there is so much misunderstanding. See, what the spiritual community has been conditioned to believe and to think is that they shouldn't engage with anything negative because it's going to lower their frequency. It's a tragic state of affairs because now what we have is people walking around saying, look, for example, I feel depressed, anxious, fearful, angry, whatever it is. Ooh, but that's a low frequency thing and I mustn't feel it because spiritual people should be high vibes. Spiritual people should be happy. Spiritual people should be thinking about abundance and joy and love, not this stuckness, perhaps, that a person might be in. So, what we have is a whole pair of spiritual people locking themselves into density because they will not do the one fundamental thing that's going to shift them, which is to connect to the pain, to actually get real, to get authentic, to drop the facade, and to engage with where they actually are. See, we know a lot of stuff that we can't apply, like this. We know we're always in the past or the future, we're hardly ever present. And when we're in the past or we're in the future, we're very much powerless because the only place that really exists is now. See, we know the stuff, but now we've got to go beyond what we know. We've got to apply what we know. And when we step out of the past and we step out of the future, what happens then is we get scared because all that we've got is the now. And sometimes the now is so raw and authentic and real, and the undealt with stuff sits there. And that's the key, to go to the undealt with stuff, to go to everything that we locked away from ourselves because we thought it was bad. We thought it was shameful. We thought it was negative. We thought it was going to harm us. But actually, That's the very thing that heals us. See, I was very blessed. I was taught in a very non direct but powerful way. When I was in my very early 20s, I got to connect with a group of beings who I called the Galactics. And they're a group of beings who I call galactics because they come from the galaxy, but not from Earth. And these beings were specifically of a 5D orientation. Some of them were 7D, many of them were 5D. And what they did is they taught me without teaching. And what that looks like is they allowed me to sit in their presence and observe them and learn from how they energetically conduct themselves. And it was very frustrating because I had a lot of questions that no one would answer. And it was very frustrating because I was in the presence of these masterful beings that wouldn't teach me. And I was angry with them for quite a while. And the one thing that kept coming home to me was, be where you are. And I would go, what ridiculous nonsense are these fools trying to teach me? I don't want to be where I am because where I am is outraged. Where I am is so angry I could knock their block off. Where I am is not where I want to be. So why? Why would I keep being told, be where you are? They don't understand, I thought. Ah, that's the problem. They don't understand what these levels of density and anger are actually like. And they would just come back. Same thing. Be where you are. Be where you are. Be where you are. And eventually, and when I say eventually, I mean eventually as in this probably took me a few years. I'd love to say this was a couple of weeks. No, this was a couple of years of learning to be brave enough to be uncomfortable, to be raw, to be real, to be angry, to feel abandoned, to feel frustrated, and to not sugarcoat it, to not analyze it, to not talk myself out of it, to actually immerse myself in it and leave my brain out of the equation. Because the brain always wants to come in and take charge. The brain wants to come in and navigate and narrate, not just navigate, but narrate the experience, which actually prevents us from energetically engaging. When I got brave enough to energetically engage, I actually got into this crazy powerful place called the now for the first time. Most people look at their watch and they say, okay, it's 5 minutes past 9. That's what time it is. I must be in the present because that's the present time. No, presence is totally different from the present. Presence is the infinite mind of God. And guess what happened? I was back there in pre-consciousness. As soon as I learned to get into the now, I was home. I was back in the God mind that I had longed for and missed. And I couldn't wait till I died because I just wanted to get back there. But oh my God, I didn't have to die. I only had to get into presence to feel the undulating waves of bliss that are the heart mind of God and myself immersing with them once again. See, I knew that place, but I didn't know that I couldn't access that place because I was stuck in time. The false matrix is also called the time matrix because we get stuck into the time matrix of the past and the future. We totally skip out on the now. We confuse it with the present instead of the infinite presence. And that's where everything shifted. That's how I started healing, by actually engaging with the woundedness, by actually engaging with the difficult, painful stuff. And then what I noticed was the more I could be present with that and not talk it, analyze it, judge it, condemn it, wish it to be something different, the more I could just get into acceptance. Now, remember, all the while, I've got these galactic teachers, but they're not giving me the words. They're not saying, okay, Kerry, step number 2, you got to get into acceptance. So step number 1, you got into the now. Now, step number 2, acceptance. Again, this took me forever to learn because all I could do was watch them transmute energy and be with energy. And so I got to kind of like the same way that I think babies learn to speak English or whatever your home language is. Nobody teaches you. Nobody says, okay, now we're going to say the word hello. You hear it so often that you just pick it up and you start mouthing these words that we learn by being immersed in the environment. So that's where I was. I was immersed in the environment of higher consciousness. And I was like, these guys, they're doing something different to what I'm doing. And I took many months, perhaps even years, to figure out that it was acceptance of what is. And what acceptance of what is means is not condoning the pain, permissioning it, nothing like that. That's not what acceptance is. Acceptance is the moment that I don't push against where I am, the moment that I don't judge where I am, the moment I allow it to be what it is, and I become more like a neutral observer, a witness. It is then that we discharge density. It is then that we discharge lower frequency. It is then that we heal. That's a missing key that a lot of people don't have. They say, okay, Kerry, so now I'm doing this. I'm starting to connect with my pain and my torment and my rage and my whatever it is, but I feel worse. That's when we go to step number 2, which is, okay, now we got to bring in acceptance. This is what true healing looks like. And we learn sacred neutrality as part of acceptance. Once the discharge of density happens, literally something miraculous occurs. And it's not really miraculous, it's more like just our nature as alchemical beings. But we would perceive it as a miracle, and that is healing becomes automatic. Healing at the emotional level, physical level, mental level, spiritual level becomes automatic when we take that step to discharge the density by being with the density in acceptance. At that point, think of it like this. At that point, think of yourself as a cup, but now you're empty. You are emptying out the woundedness. You're emptying out the density. So now you've got an empty cup. So what's going to happen with the empty cup? The universe is going to fill it. There can be no empty spaces in the universe. So the moment you create the space for the universe to come in, which is another way of saying pure God consciousness, it resumes its rightful place. And then there's peace, and then there's love, and then there's epiphanies, and then there's breakthroughs, and then healing happens. That's the journey.
That was so beautiful. I love the language you used about the discharging of the emotions. What is it about acceptance that discharges those dense emotions?
Right. When we're not in acceptance, we're in its counter opposite, its counterbalance. So the counterbalance to acceptance is judgment. We always would have thought in the false matrix, right? We would have thought if I said to most people, what's the opposite of judgment? They would say, well, Kerry, that's stupid. It's non judgment. But that is not true. The opposite state of being, that's what I'm talking about here, the opposite state of being of judgment is acceptance. Judgment glues you, binds you to whatever you judge. And that's why we cannot heal whilst we're judging our state of being. So, for example, if we may feel not good enough because we have a disease or a thought process or a trauma or whatever it might be, or we're judging someone else and we're saying, it's their fault. They did this. They put me in this position. What we're doing is gluing ourselves through the medium of judgment to the thing that we judge. We cannot be free of the thing that we judge while we're judging it. So we have to step out of judgment. That's what makes acceptance powerful. Acceptance is that it is that step out of judgment into a very unconditional, neutral space. But you see, we're so not used to these states of being that when I describe them to people, they very often say, oh, so it's like apathy. Oh, so it's like not caring. That is not what neutrality means at all. Neutrality is what you are when you're not judging something. And neutrality is a gorgeous place. It's so harmonious. It's so peaceful. It's so higher dimensional. It's who we truly are. The judgment that really binds us to 3D and all the pain and suffering of 3D, once we transcend it, we don't have to go to 5D. We bring 5D into the body. We bring higher consciousness home into the body by dropping the judgment. So acceptance is the golden remedy here.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's gonna be helpful for so many people. I think it's something that a lot of people are awakening to right now because so many of us were raised in previous generations and even in my generation to just suppress your emotions. And even in religious settings, I was raised in Christianity and emotions were always judged as a bad thing. And then I moved into the word of faith movement in the charismatic branch of Christianity as a teenager, and it was very much about just, the power of your mind, which I do believe in, but it was very much like
Mm.
depression is not allowed, sadness is not allowed, sickness is not allowed in the sense that we just completely override it with the power of our mind and go back to joy and health and without ever dealing with those negative emotions. And so that's something that
Yeah.
I am just now learning in my 30s
Yeah.
is how to be comfortable with denser emotions.
It's life changing.
Mhm.
It is utterly, utterly life changing. And we've got a whole spiritual community that wants to word their way into healing. And here's what
Mhm.
I mean by it: they feel upset, they feel depressed. And now what they're going to do is they're going to use words, and we call these words affirmations.
Mhm.
I am joyful, I am exuberant, whatever they are, right? We start doing mantras. And then what's going to happen is a person's going to say, I actually feel better. And they're going to start listening to gurus who talk about mind power. And they're going to go, I'm healed. Like this is a Christmas miracle. The solution to life is upon me because I just have to word my way into a different state of being. But all that that is sitting inside your jail cell and facing the other direction. It's like you were facing into the direction of depression. Now you're facing into the direction of another false reality that you're trying to convince yourself of. Depression was a false reality. Depression was never the truth. But the false reality that you conjured is equally not the truth. The only way to get out of the jail is not to break down the jail cell, the jail walls, but to reach higher. There's no ceiling on our emotional prison. We have to transcend the pain by going right into the pain and not trying to put a band aid over it. That's what the words do, or the mind power does. It just puts a band aid over it, and then the wound festers beneath the band aid. And eventually, the facade of the next illusory reality that a person may have created, eventually that comes crashing down. And then a person's going to go, oh God, I feel like a failure now because I couldn't uphold my joyful reality. I couldn't uphold my high vibe state of being because it's not got any foundation beneath it. So you would have to spend your whole life holding up a false reality in order to have the illusion of it being real. And what I'm encouraging people to do is just let everything crash. The false reality, let it fall down at your feet. The current reality, let yourself be where you are. And then what happens is you escape illusion. And a lot of people aren't brave enough, they aren't courageous enough to come here until I say to them, this is easier. Being in authenticity, even if it hurts, is easier than being in the lie. And it's temporary. The lie, there's no end to. You just have to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. But authenticity, you move out of pain, you move through pain into something that you never, ever have to uphold because it's a natural state of being. I don't have to walk around saying, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm healed, I'm whole, I'm powerful. I don't have to walk around saying those things because I am. Why would I say things? Why would I mind power? Why would I word my way into a reality that is already my truth? And the joy, the lightness, the ease of living in a reality that is your authentic truth is so exuberant. It's so effortless. And then you expand on your truth naturally. You expand. You know why? Because God's nature and the universe's nature is to expand. We are continually expanding things. We're not designed to be in one place ever. We're not designed for stagnancy. We're designed for expansion. So simply learning this fine, masterful skill of being where you are leads you not just to break through where you've been, but it brings you into continual and infinite expansion of your authentic state of being. We got it all wrong.
Thank you so much, Carrie. And I'd like to switch gears a little bit. You mentioned in the beginning that you experienced the different dimensions when you were out of body. Could you share a little bit more about what the different dimensions are?
Yeah, they're definitely not delineated in the way that our 3D mind delineates things. Like our 3D mind is very segmented. I always refer to the left brain and the right brain as a perfect example of the flaw in our design. This is a false matrix design, by the way. The fact that our left and right brain are segmented, we literally have a veil between, we have a membrane between these two hemispheres of the brain, separating them, which prevents us from ever being whole brained thinkers. We're either left or we're right, or we're flitting between the two. But when we realize that that sheath between the two hemispheres of our brain is actually designed to be permeable, we begin to experience things more as waves of energy and less as very linear, segmented, analytical points. So I'm going to try and explain it because I know most people are very analytical. I'm going to try and explain it in that way, but I want you to know that the experience of multidimensionality feels very much like waves of energy, and the waves just kind of accelerate and build and expand. But you don't ever go, oh, look, now I'm in 60. But look, now I'm in 70. But now I'm in 80. You just kind of get the sense of expansion. So in 5D, no, let's go back to 4D. In 4D, the thing that is the most different, that stands out as a defining attribute of 4D, is that 4D doesn't have time and space, certainly not in the way 3D does. It has some kind of time space, but it's from our perspective, it doesn't exist. Time and space. And a great example of this is when you dream. When you dream, you can be in a desert, and then suddenly you are on top of an icy mountain, but you didn't get on a plane or a train, you just boom, you're there. And then you think of your next door neighbor that you loved so much when you were a kid, and then boom, they walk through the door, but you didn't phone them and invite them there, they just arrived. So 4D, everything happens now. 4D, there is, and that's why people say they have very crazy dreams, things aren't separated by time or necessarily by space. So that's one of the defining characteristics of 4D. It is not much different to 3D in terms of consciousness. You can have judgment in 3D, you can have judgment in 4D. But all dimensions, instead of being one static place, are like rungs of a ladder. All dimensions have a lower, middle, and upper level. So if I were in the lower level of 4D and I looked at 3D, I probably wouldn't tell the difference. I would just say, wow, time is weird. Time is like, sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast. Things are happening as I think of them. My intuition is getting more peaked. So, really, what I'm saying to you when I describe that is we're actually already in 4D. We just don't see much of a difference. That's why we have these crazy time anomalies that we do. But we're in the lower rungs of 4D, which from a consciousness perspective are not much different to 3D. But it means the transition to 5D has begun. Then we get to the middle and eventually the upper levels of 4D. The upper levels of 4D look a lot more like 5D, a lot less like 3D. So here you're beginning to gravitate to 5D, which is built on acceptance, the defining trait of 5D. Every single 5D being that I've had the privilege of meeting has the same feel about them. And the feel is divine neutrality, sacred neutrality. We would use the word acceptance. They would never look at you and judge you, even if you did something heinous in their presence. They would look at you and go, wow, that's such an interesting thing. I wonder why you would choose to do that. And they are genuinely curious, but no condemnation, no judgment comes from them. That doesn't mean that they're pushovers, though. That doesn't mean because they don't judge and they don't condemn that everything's okay with them. They will certainly gravitate to things that they're in resonance with, and they will walk away from things that they're not in resonance with. But that's 5D. 6D is very much like 4D in the sense that it's an in-between world. 4D is like a bridge to 5, 6D is like a bridge to 7. 7D is very crystalline. 7D, you're going to use a lot less words, you're way more telepathic. 7D, there is no time. 7D, you can, if you want to, step into time, which is quite a contrasting experience. There's still time in 5D. 7D, you can be in time if you were trying to connect to a time-bound being, for example, but your natural state in 7D is very timeless. 8D and 9D are higher levels of that crystalline consciousness. But now we're tending towards collective consciousness, which is not groupthink and not hive mind. Collective consciousness starts at around the 8D level and goes all the way to 12. These are varying degrees of collective consciousness. And in the collective consciousness, you can have the experience of yourself as the individual. So, like that would be 8 and 9D. You've got an experience of yourself as the individual, but simultaneously you experience the collective. You're both. Dolphins are really good at bringing in 12D energy. Dolphins are 5D consciousness, 3D bodies, and 12D capabilities. They're amazing beings. But if you look at a dolphin, they're a perfect example of what I'm describing when I talk about these higher dimensions, these 8, 9, 10, 11D dimensions, where you can be aware of the individual, but equally you're aware of the collective. So if you look at dolphins, how is it that they always do this amazing, almost looks like choreographed swimming, right? They jump up at the same time. They go to the same height. They dive down at the same time. They go down to the same depth. How do they do that? Are they going under the water? Okay, 1, 2, 3, Fred, let's go. It looks so perfect. It looks so in sync because they're in the collective mind. They can be the pod and they can be the individual. They can flip between both. So I use them as a great example to describe what we will feel like in the higher dimensions. When we go 8, 9, 10, 11, 12D, in those states of being, all that we're doing is we are stepping further away from individuation, further into collective experiencing. And then once we get to 12D, we experience ourselves as a monad. In other words, we experience ourselves as a collective consciousness, and then we are preparing to merge back with God, which is around about 15D. The Galactics always said to me, be very careful when you describe dimensions, be very careful about putting numbers to them, because the truth is dimensions are infinite. But number 1 to 15 does not represent infinity. So I want to do my best to cater to the very analytical minds by describing 15 dimensions. But at the same time, I want to say that when you're in those higher dimensions, you are in infinity. And they go on forever and forever and forever. And there is no end. And there is no end to your multidimensionality. There is no end to the expansion of God. So we keep going. But hopefully that gives you guys just a little insight as to where we are. It's like the journey of you, the journey of your soul that I'm describing, from the separate individual thing to the unified collective thing.
Wow, I love that explanation. And are there dimensions that are lower than 3D?
There are definitely dimensions that we would think of as lower than 3D, but what they are mimicry dimensions. So
Mhm.
what I'm going to explain here is we've got what I've described here in all of those dimensions is the natural universe. But we don't live in the natural universe. We live in the false matrix. So even the 3D that we live in the false matrix is not the 3D of the natural universe. The 4D of the false matrix is not the 4D of the organic universe. In fact, the 4D of the false matrix has its own special name. That's the astral realm. So when people talk about astral projecting, what they're doing is they're going into the clone or the mimicry system of the false matrix's 4D. That's what the astral realm is. And equally, there is a 5D in the astral realm, and it's very dark and it's not nice and it's very dense. But those are all being collapsed now, and it doesn't go much beyond 5D. And those are becoming spaces that are very difficult to navigate right now because of the work that we're doing here in collapsing the false matrix. There are dimensions. So, what I've described to you is dimensions that are denser in frequency. There's also a two-dimensional world, though, which is the mineral kingdom. So crystals, for example, they're 2D, but they're not less. A 2D being is not less than a 3D being. It's just if we look at the consciousness and the way that we carry potentiality, it's different in 2D and in 3D. And that's all it is. It's not higher and lower, it's just different. It's like when I describe the chakras to people, they say, oh, my lower chakras versus my higher chakras. It's just positions on the body. It's not better and worse. And equally, two-dimensional and three-dimensional is not better and worse, lower and higher. It's just different expressions, different ways of showing up as consciousness.
So, where did the false matrix come from?
From some very depraved minds of some very depraved beings who
Mhm.
took on a role. We all did. When we individuated from God, which was brought about by God doing what God does, which is to expand. This is the thrill. When you're in the heart mind of God, you will know this, that the greatest thrill that there is to that heart mind of God is expansion, growth, learning something, evolving somehow. But when you are an all knowing thing, how do you evolve? It's very difficult. So, what God conjured in God's beautiful creative mind was, ooh, what if I individuated out the parts of myself that make me me, and I separated these parts of myself into dark and light, and I allowed them to have their own individual experiences, which is kind of like a very crazy analogy that I want to give you. My crazy analogy is this. Imagine that you have the best chocolate cake in the whole wide world and it could never be beaten, and there was never, ever going to be anything better. It was the best. How would you ever make that better? Well, if you took out the raw ingredients and you separated that chocolate cake out into the best eggs and the best flour and the best ingredients that you could, and you evolved each of those separate individual ingredients and then put them all back together again, you then would have a chance of creating a bigger, better chocolate cake. That's kind of like the analogy of what God did when God undertook the creation journey in the first place. We must understand that creation is not the only thing that God is doing. Creation is like a finger on the hand of the body of God. God is doing many, many things because God is an omnipotent, forever thing. Creation is just a small part. And yet for us, it's all that there is. You know, for us, creation is so big, it's so mystical. But ultimately, it's just the separate ingredients of God, separated out, having individual experiences. And then in that separation, some of the ingredients of God, so to speak, were darkness. And darkness took their role very seriously. And they became very corrupted by their role. And they became very addicted to their role. And they began to feel superior in their role. And they began to think depraved, corrupted thoughts like this. Who's this God character? We don't need God. We are more powerful. We, the darkness, are bigger than, better than, wiser than, smarter than God. I mean, this is just depravity at its finest. But these are beings who we call the archons. That was their corrupted thought process. And so what they did is they said, okay, we are going to push God away. We're going to separate ourselves from God. We don't want to have anything to do with this God character. But when they did that, they lost their ability to create. You cannot push God away but still be a creator. They were still genius, so they had the mind of a God being, but they didn't have the ability to create. So they initiated the false matrix. The false matrix was going to be where they would take beings, aka us, from the organic universe, put us into the false matrix, and we, on their behalf, would create. We would fuel them because they cannot fuel themselves. So we become a food source, a fuel source, an energetic food source, that is. We become the creators of the low frequency reality that they want. This is why the spiritual community has been so toxic, so distorted, with ideas that keep them stuck and prevent them from evolving. This is why religions are exactly the same thing. They keep people small to keep the false matrix in place. These are some of spiritual people are some of the most powerful people that there are because they have a memory of home. That's why they crave God. They crave God because they have that memory. So the false matrix set about to crush that desire for growth within them and the capacity for expansion and keep them limited through false spiritual ideologies and teachings. The false matrix is the creation. Well, creation is the wrong word because these beings can't create. It is the engineering of darkness. But ultimately, all darkness will collapse in on itself. God knew that, and God knows that. And that's what's currently underway right now. That darkness is busy collapsing, and it's collapsing under its own weight. It's collapsing because the higher we become, the less available we are to create the realities of the false matrix, the less available we are to be a food source for the archonic beings of darkness to feed off of, so their system begins to crumble. But that's why we came. We came to take the false matrix apart and turn it back into light, to restore it back to the original universe that we come from.
You mentioned toxic ideas and spirituality that keep people in the false matrix. What are some things to watch out for?
Analysis. You don't need to understand anything. Spiritual people always want meaning. I
Mhm.
had a dream. In my dream, I saw a snake. What does it mean? I saw 1111. What does it mean? I have this feeling. What does it mean? Spiritual people always want meaning because they want to analyze, because analysis keeps us stuck. Analysis keeps us away from the energetic truth of who we are. We are radiant light. We don't, when you are your true self, you will realize you don't think with your brain. You feel as a heart mind. I refer to God as a heart mind. It's a heart mind combined into one. So imagine a supreme intelligence, ultimately wise, but not bound to analysis. So,
Mhm.
one of the big points that we trip on as spiritual people is the desire for meaning in everything, the desire to use words to think our way into ascension or to think ourselves into a heightened state of being. If we drop thought and allow ourselves to engage with present consciousness, we're going to do ourselves the greatest service in the world. If we practice, even just for 10 minutes a day, what do I feel like to myself when I just breathe? Can I just breathe consciously for 10 minutes and experience the universe flowing through me? And what most people will do is battle, because most people want to do something with the 10 minutes. Most people want a goal. Most people want an outcome. Okay, so I've got 10 minutes. I'm going to dedicate it to love. I'm going to do this. I'm going to, or I'm going to create this. Spiritual people always want to manifest something. I want to create a new environment, a better car, a better house, a better life, or whatever it might be, a higher reality even. Be where you are. Just learn as a spiritual person the power of not escaping, the power of being when you are. And when you have the courage to do that, when you have the courage to be where you are, you shift everything. And then everything that you couldn't even dare to ask for, that you couldn't even articulate, would be your highest possible fantasy. All of that stuff starts dripping down around you and coming to you without you manifesting it, because you stopped the process of creating from your mind and you became a co-creator with the universe and with your soul. And you learned the power of actually being the light instead of directing the light. Most spiritual people I watch them do this. I've got an online community, and we get these heightened states of consciousness, right? And then I watch people. How do they accommodate this very potent, very heightened frequency? I watch them, and this is what they do. The high frequency comes in and they go, okay, God's in my body, right? God's flowing through my veins. Then they start telling the light where to go. Well, you must go to my left knee because I've got arthritis there. And you must solve that problem I've got with my family member that I'm having all of those fights with. And they start micromanaging their healing instead of just allow the light to be with you without you directing it, so that you stand a chance of being the light. And then what happens is you embody the truth, not just of who you are, but the truth of who God is. And then you transcend all of those illusions, and you transcend all of the I wants, and you step into true potential. In other words, your true potential, which we've got no idea of. Another mistake, this is the last one I'm going to give you. Spiritual people, a big mistake that they do is they shield. Oh, I've got to protect myself, got to protect my energy, got to shield, got to shield. What we do when we shield is we're blocking off. What we do when we shield is we put ourselves behind very tall walls. And as spiritual people, we of all people know the power of love and the power of light, but we do not trust it. We do not trust it because we do not know it. We think light, we don't feel light. But if we let ourselves actually feel the experience of God and feel the experience of light and embody light, what happens is that light becomes a force field around us that walks out into the world ahead of us, solving every problem that we're about to step into before we even step into it. There is no need to shelter and shield ourselves from the forces of darkness. When you radiate light, darkness runs from you, darkness is repelled by you. Thinking that we have to shield ourselves only empowers the things that we're shielding ourselves from. Now, there is a time and a place for a person to use shielding, and that is when they do not know their light. And if they do not know their light, guided meditation, let it be your best friend, and learn what it is to be immersed in light so that you can start building a relationship with the light field that you are. And once you trust that enough, then you drop those shields and you shine, baby, shine, and let that light lead you, because it will. It's designed to do that.
Carrie, thank you so much for everything that you shared with us. Would you like to tell the viewers where they can find you and anything you have going on that you'd like them to know about?
Yeah, well, my website is an easy one. It's Kerry K, but it's Kerry. Kerry is not with a C. So many Americans, they call me Carrie, like you're carrying a
Oh.
handbag. I'm not Carrie, I'm Kerry with a K. So it's kerryk.com is my website. And there's a whole heap here. There's guided meditations. There's an online community, which is my very, very sacred space. That's where I really share the true gems of what I've learned over the years, and where I impart the energetic wisdom, not just teaching people with my mouth, but teaching people with my energy in the same way that I learned from the Galactics. So that's in the Plasma Light Tribe. That's my online community. And I've got an amazing course that I'm starting on the 7th of April called Forever Starts Now, but you'll find all the details to that in the online shop. So go to kerryk.com and you can find all my social media there, loads of free videos, loads of free meditations too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carrie. I'll have those links in the show notes. And thank you once again for being willing to share your experiences and your wisdom with us.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. It was beautiful to be with you and your audience. Thank you.
Yes, likewise. Thank you for watching and listening. Your views, likes, comments, and shares truly make the biggest difference in supporting this channel. Don't forget to check the show notes for all the links to today's guest, as well as my links. You'll find me on social media at Love Covered Life, my website, lovecoveredlife.com, and the Be a Guest link for anybody who would like to be a guest on the channel. I have great news. Love Covered Life podcast is coming available on audio podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to your audio podcasts.